Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Christabel, for that excellent introduction. I also want to thank DP and Thomas for inviting me to join you all here today. It is a pleasure to be connecting with all of you to talk about what's going on in the world that we all love, which is technology. As Dominic noted, I've been in this space for over 40 years, but IDC, the company that I work for, was founded over 60 years ago with the motivation of understanding how companies were adopting technology. At that time, it was, where are all the mainframes? Now, when I joined a little bit later in the mid-'80s, we were beginning the PC networking area, and I do remember I was the modem analyst, so that was the technology I was dealing with. And I remember this interesting conversation with a senior technology leader from a major modem company, Hayes, some of you may recall them, who said, nobody needs a 9600 baud modem because you can't type that fast. Now, I took away from this a very clear message that any predictions about the future and where things are going by technology leaders should always be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. And I always try and do that when I'm talking through this as well. Now, I've gone through many different technology waves, just like all of you in the room. And I think I would note that the reason we're all here today is that all of you, the companies you've supported, the systems you've supported for your companies as we've adopted client server and web and cloud and all the other things, it's because you all did a fabulous job of making sure that companies could use all that technology. But we're at a new phase now where we have to talk about the next new pivot for technology that's going to shape what we all do, which is AI. And so I want to deal with you and give you some insights on what we've seen over the last year and where we see things going over the next year. I'm not going to get into, artificial general intelligence and when they take over the planet. That's not my job. But I want to talk about what we need to do to succeed and make sure that our companies are taking advantage and using AI effectively over the next few years. So I'm going to leave you with three simple things. When we talk to CIOs, we talk to business leaders, and we hear what they found that was important for them to succeed, they've highlighted that for the next few years, our focus, we have to be, as I would say, focus, ensure consistency, and always think about the challenge of scale. Now, why that's happening is because when we go back and look at what happened in 2024, we saw a very clear story about there was a lack of focus. And we saw this as summarized as the proof of concept trap. There was a recognition that there was an amazing amount of inconsistency in the tools and the models and the data and the apps that we were looking at for AI. And that there was time and time again, even where we thought we had something good and was successful, when it came time to scale, either it was too expensive or we just couldn't get access to the technology where we needed it to do it effectively. And this, for us, is the next big challenge that's going to play out here. Now, let's go look at a little deeper into each of those. So first, let's look at the proof of concept trap. So we actually do track this. I happen to own a survey we do every month of about 1,000 IT leaders around the world. And we wanted to see where were we on this whole stage. Now, late 2023, early 2024, companies had walked in with hundreds of use cases. A lot of enthusiasm from employees around the company, all businesses, all sectors, all tasks. Say, hey, let's do these things. Let's use Gen AI to change what we do here. In general, on average, a typical enterprise ended up doing about 37 proof of concepts. And as we checked in July, sort of halfway through the year, all right, only about 37% of those had kind of made it to the successful stage where we're going to try and convert them into production. We went back in January, so just a few months ago, and asked the same question, and the results were a bit underwhelming. You would think after another 6 months, we weren't shooting for 100%. That's never what you would expect. But it would have been nice if it had gotten above 44%. And when we highlighted what were the things that were limiting this and what was basically preventing people from doing it, we saw that they really fall into two groups. One is IT leaders, business leaders continue to be focused and concerns around data. Can I trust that this data has been interpreted correctly? Can I trust that I am not losing, sort of giving away intellectual property? Can I trust that somehow or another it's not being perverted and used and sort of creating an hallucination that's going to affect my brand? That was one. The other side was the cost, as we noted. It's just too expensive to get this infrastructure up, or the amount of money I had to spend on the models and platforms to make that work. All a significant issue. Now, one thing that people always ask is, well, okay, that was building your own custom apps. That was your Gen AI model products. What about when you adopted something like Copilot or some of the various, tools that were coming out, Gen AI tools from major software providers that allowed you to do things? And how successful were those? And the data was a little bit better. It's like we got to half of all of those have been successful or have been successfully converted. But not great. I mean, you would like it to be better than that. And the thing that became clear is that the heightened concern around the loss of control of our data, or that somehow or another how this comes out, we're losing the ability to set the agenda and protect our brand, was a major barrier for why people would take this forward. We saw again and again, people said, like, internal-facing apps, great. We can put them into production. If it's customer-facing, no, we need to take a little more time. We really need to be verified. They just couldn't make that leap. But we also saw very early, and it's starting, is a lot more concerns about the cost associated with those third-party apps. Can I really align that cost with value? And do I have the ability to understand that? So those were the big concerns here. What all this is that we're really talking about, the last year has been a Gen AI scramble, is that people have these different tasks, like what do we do with our data, what's the application, what's our governance policy, how are we even going to train people on how to use this? Do we have money to do that? It's been all over the map. There hasn't been consistency or thinking about consistency. It really plays out is there's really application we all know about, but the main ones have really been AI platforms. So I've got all these different tools and models. How do I use them? Where do I get them from? The data and the data processes and rules that allow me to use that data, and then ultimately the infrastructure. What's the tools, what's the systems underneath that allow me to use all that? And this is where we see across the board inconsistency and inability to scale is a constant battle. Now, when we think about the other side of this, though, we note that for a lot of companies, it really came down to governance. And what was interesting is we actually did the research, and people would always say, oh, well, regulated companies would have a harder time adopting Gen AI. We actually found it was the opposite. And it's because regulated companies already had existing data governance practices in place. Now, they may not have been perfectly aligned with AI needs, and there was work to do there, but they had something to start with. They had a foundation of processes and people and technologies. Unregulated companies were just more and more likely to be overwhelmed. And that was a big challenge and something we saw as well. So it's often overlooked, but for many companies, this was the biggest barrier to truly getting to that next phase. Now, when we put together companies, we take it across the board, and I would say this for all of you in this room, if we did a survey of your companies, what we would note is probably about a third of you and your companies are what we would call frozen in fear. That even if things look good, even if things seem reasonable, we just can't pull that trigger because we are so worried about the data concerns and the brand concerns. About 15% said, hey, we have the confidence in our data, we have the confidence in our systems. Our big thing, we're ready to go. We just have to find better solutions that allow us to scale quickly and help us do that more effectively. But for most of us, and half I'd say in the room here, is your company is standing there on the edge waiting to take the leap. And we're saying 2025 is when we're going to do that. Now, before we take that leap, though, I do feel like I have to step back and note that there is another problem. It's the IT industry itself. And I'm speaking up here as part of that, have been part of it. If we look at what's the industry that's most rapidly pivoted to incorporating AI into its business plans and its strategies and its technology development and its marketing, it's the IT industry. So we've talked about the industry AI pivot. It's not everybody, not all the same, but it has definitely become a major part of every conversation. And what had happened for you, I'm going to acknowledge, we've heard this from many CIOs, is great. We had a strategic partner, we were ready to do a plan, we'd picked a software thing, they just got bought by somebody who's not our strategic partner. Now we have to go rethink our whole strategy. How do we do this? it's been something where that lack of confidence in a partner long term, especially when you're dealing with startups or large companies, is a challenge. The second part of it is, okay, infrastructure, that's also a thing. We can't predict what our infrastructure costs are going to be as much as we would like to. People are changing the rules. People are changing the licensing policies. How we get access to new technology is changing. That's not something that makes our life easier. Please stop doing that. And the last is, we definitely acknowledge that the sales teams, the go-to-marketing teams, whether it's in services, it's products and softwares, they are very happy to tell us how we can use our great technology to do 5, 10, 20 use cases, and then we'll figure out how we do it, because now we want you to use them together. But what we hear again and again is people said, well, these were great proof of concepts. They worked out really well, but 2 months later, nobody was using the tool anymore because we didn't bother, and the people helping us develop didn't help us do the work to help train our employees on how to take advantage of the technology. And that's never a good story. So one thing here we are, as you go out in the coming year and you're looking at your AI partners, the technology providers are going to help you make this AI, try and figure out where they play in this. How effectively are they helping you solve the issues versus being part of the problem? Now, that's where we were. Now let's talk about what all of the organizations are doing now. Where are they focused? So we went out in that same survey, and actually we did this in December, so it was a good time from a budget standpoint to understand where people were, and said, okay, where are you planning to increase your spending the most in the coming year? Now we have AI separately, so we'll keep that off the list for now. But what we saw were some very interesting things. So first of all, let's focus on modernizing our applications. That's a high priority. Let's modernize our corporate data centers. In fact, in the US, that was the top priority, was modernizing corporate data centers. The other ones now were enhancing our resiliency, our cyber recovery. This was the top budget spend in Europe. And then finally, for many companies around the world, there continues to be this, let's migrate some of our applications to a cloud model, whether that's SaaS or moving it to infrastructure. That was particularly top of the list in Asia Pacific region. But across the board, they're all here. What I took from this, and when we saw this, is everybody likes to talk about what's the word of the year for the coming year. And in 2024, it was clearly innovation or experimentation. But it was clear as we walked in that CIOs and businesses said that we would like 2025 to be the year of modernization. That we've learned a lesson from 2024 that to do these things right, to be focused, to be consistent, to drive scale, we really got to get our underlying systems that are already in place that our company is based on in a much more modern, updated, scalable fashion. And we want to spend our money doing that. That's what we'd like to be spending our money on in 2025. Now, why did they want to do that? What were the underlying factors that drove that? Again, some interesting insights here. So think about the top, 4 and 3 on this list, going from bottom to top, but the most important was improving the resiliency of the organization and understanding and recognizing that more and more of their new apps actually require more performance, more scale, more capacity than they really have in their existing environments. So we got to improve that. Not a surprise in some levels, but I will tell you this actually ended up being a big surprise, is preparing for the greater use of AI in the business, finished at number 2. When we actually did the same survey in September, it was at number 1 at around 45%. But what had come up now was, and this was the big increase, was reducing IT operating costs. Now, it is clear that we saw at the same time we were doing this survey that people increasingly understand that 2025 might be kind of an uncertain year for the economy and for the world. And that while we're not going to change our plans, we have to start thinking and preparing for that uncertainty. So I do want to say that's something that's coming through here. What I would summarize from this, though, is if you look at all of these, you look at 4, 3, and 1, the common thing here that we see people want is observability. They need more insights into what's going on in their systems, whether that's, are we more resilient as a business? Are we exposing ourselves? Are we actually able to monitor the performance and the operations of our platforms? And of course, are our costs actually in control in other pieces? But I would actually note that even number 2 on AI expansion is about observability. Because one of the things we absolutely said, part of this consistency is predictability in cost. And the best way to have some predictability in cost to start with is at least to know what you're actually spending and where it's going. So having observability across the board is, we think, is a high priority here. Now let's delve more into AI in particular. So this is from the same group of people, what's your AI budget for 2025 and 2026? So you can see here, on average, this is for companies with 1,000 and more employees around the world. So it's not small business, let's say. Good numbers, and actually this is up about 100% from 2024. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you right though is this isn't just Gen AI, this is all AI. This is for your predictive systems, your machine learning systems, whatever. And as a matter of fact, a majority of most companies' AI budget today remains not Gen AI and all these new things, but it's those existing systems. Because really, AI has been embedded into businesses for more than a decade. However, it's been fragmented. It's very narrow systems focusing on very specific tasks and very specific business units. One of the tasks that we see that's part of this goal on consistency is we need investments that allow us to actually maximize the value of those existing AI assets and systems, but allow them to start being useful for a broader range of people inside the organization. And what I would say here is what that came down to, when we talk across the board, no matter where you are on your AI journey today, it's absolutely going to be increasing as a part of your spend in the next couple of years. But the way we like to think about it is that AI is becoming the next strategic workload for most enterprises. Just like ERP was in the 90s, just like e-commerce systems were in 2000s, mobile and cloud systems were in 2010s, this is the area where more and more companies recognize that while we have made AI everywhere, that now we have to make the ability to use AI systems and the data that's extracted by AI systems is one of our basic corporate muscles. And that means a much more focused view on how we make investment decisions for the underlying technologies, that we recognize that these have to be built for scale, and that consistency is the key to allowing us to get the maximum benefit out of it. So here we are, 2025. Let's move on to this next stage of adoption. Again, hear what we say. The winners, we believe, in the next phase, the next year, are those who focus on processes and make sure that they are understanding at a business level and an IT level whether that's going to play out, that they've adopted practices and solutions that allow them to basically be consistent in the design and deployment of any new AI products and services out there, and that whatever they've done, it's designed to be built and run at scale. And 2025, 2026 is really about your organizations making the right partner decisions, technology decisions to meet all those goals. Now, focusing on process, let's say this is a people conversation. And again, just a little bit hard to see some of this, but strategy is absolutely step one. No more, let's do 5 million proof of concepts. We're absolutely hearing more and more people say, look, yes, we could do finance, we could do HR, we could do marketing, we could do all these different things, but what are the 4 things that will change our actual business outcomes? Move the needle on revenue, move the needle on our profitability, something that we can share to Wall Street. And we see more and more CIOs, CEOs, and this new beast, the Chief AI Officer. How many of you in your organizations have a Chief AI Officer? Anybody out there? Not seeing a lot here. Oh, I see a couple there in the back. A lot of tech companies have them. Not yet a lot of businesses, but that's part of it. But the other key thing here, and what's really not coming out quite as much, is what most people recognize is that governance, that where we need to spend our money here is on governance. The systems that allow us to have greater confidence in the use of our data, where it is, how it's being used, and it's all the models, all the different things that are playing out there. Now, the total spending by enterprises, because we do look at the budgets here. If you look at their total AI budget, how much went into governance, strategy planning, so a lot of services products here and some software. And then, of course, people, which is training. And that's not really showing here at the bottom, but that's the last bit. In total, this is around 11%. I'd say one of the biggest problems that we think the whole industry has when it comes to AI is that the people number is less than 1%. So we clearly are not investing in training our employees to take advantage of AI as an industry as a whole, both business people and IT people. We need to do more of that. More insights, more value is a critical next step. Now, the next part of this is let's have consistent design and orchestration of our systems. And again, a little bit of a challenge here on seeing the pieces, but applications, absolutely much more consistency in how you think about selecting applications and where you're using them, making that decision about, look, if it's strategic to my business, I want to build it. If it's not, then yes, we should be looking at a SaaS partner, but one who thinks about those things around design and data consistency and so forth. But it's more and more, it's coming down to what's the platform at the infrastructure level, at the model management, application development management level that people have to focus on to really succeed and thrive in this space. And then finally, the data. And as a matter of fact, what we're seeing when we talk to people is their biggest focus right now is on the data. How do I get full advantage out of the data? Now, one thing I'm going to acknowledge, and what we talk, all of you in this room will understand this. The IT organization has been part of the data conversation since I started in this business. However, it's often we're seen as the custodians of data. And so all we say is just make sure that it's there, make sure it's backed up, make sure that it's archived, make sure that we can recover it, but don't worry about the value. That's our problem as a business unit or other pieces. And we've noticed there's this sort of decided lack of thinking about the fact that data is now, for many organizations, a product, and that you have to start adopting product management practices. Good product management practices to allow to do that. One thing that we definitely look to from the IT organization increasingly are to adopt solutions that allow companies to treat their data in that more expansive business way. Things that allow you to have the confidence that you know where your data is and how it's being used, and that business leaders can therefore start making better business decisions about how to exploit it. Now, we combine those three together: applications, AI platforms, data. That's all software for the most part. That's about 69% of your company's likely spending on AI in the coming year. So that's the biggest single piece of where the money is going. But we have this last part, which is build for scale. And this is where it's really hard to show this because it's whited out. The real question here, as we all know, is infrastructure. It's like, how much infrastructure do I need to buy? How many of you actually know your company owns some GPUs sitting somewhere? So I'm seeing a few, all right, not a lot, but they're there. We find them, we see companies who've done that. They bought something off a truck, an H100 somewhere, we think, and they're doing interesting things. But it certainly makes it hard to scale when you do that. And then we have all the major cloud providers announcing $10 billion, $100 billion, $500 billion investment plans for data centers and construction and everything over the coming years. What we tell you, for you sitting in this room, you're not in the data center business when it comes to building out AI, but you are in the business of making sure that you have a common, consistent platform for managing the running of code and apps in the cloud, in dedicated systems that you may be putting in yourself in your data center, but increasingly also systems that you're going to put out at the edges of your business. Because that's where AI really pays off. It's when you start giving answers in the right place, in the right time, and in the right context. And that's about local. Now, that's 20% of today of what people spend on infrastructure. And it's the software, the as a service, and the hardware all combined. So it's also an important part of this. So you get the total math here, where it plays out, understanding the mix. What we tell people for this particular part of the story, the build and the optimize, it is where partners and making strategic decisions about partners is the most critical. And while it would be great to say, hey, we're in this for, let's do 5-year relationships and 3-year relationships, which is what all of your the major IT providers would like you to do, when we talk to CIOs and leaders and we say, let's keep it at 2 years. It's important that you think about these technologies are changing very quickly, especially when you get into the high levels of the models and the advanced services, whatever. It's like, let's keep it 2 levels. But when you're thinking about the underlying systems you're going to use to manage, orchestrate all the infrastructure out there and orchestrate the use of all those data, so the management tools, this is where actually a longer-term strategic relationship is critical to success, because that's going to give you the confidence that you have strong data and the ability to deploy assets and code wherever they reside. Now I'm going to close with one last thing, because we can't do any speech at IDC without talking about what's next and where are things going. And if you could see all these, one thing you would notice is that in every one of these, we talked a little about this idea of agents. So, all right, Gen AI was the topic of 2 years ago. We're now talking about agents, agentic AI. What does that mean? Well, I'm not going to spend, I don't have an hour and a half to tell you what all that means, so I won't do that. But what I will say out is let's give you a little early view on how your colleagues, IT leaders, are thinking about this agent to Gen AI dynamic and how that compares. Because 2 years ago, Gen AI was everything, and it dominated every conversation. And like we said, we saw all these proof of concepts and other things. So, all right, about the same point 2 years ago when everybody was at that same level of maturity on Gen AI, where we are now with agentic in late December, all right, about 46% of companies said, yes, somewhere in our organization, we've got maybe a marketing team or a few teams that are using something that they would call an agent. Now, we're not forcing them to define that, but they think that's what it is. And we're experimenting with it. And that's about where people were with Gen AI at the same point. So that's not a lot of change there. Now, how many people think that this whole new technology is going to be disruptive to their business in the next 18 months? And it was 32%. That sounds really good, but when we asked this for Gen AI, it was 68%. So clearly, at least IT leaders are a little bit more skeptical about, wow, we're hearing all this stuff, but is it really going to have impact on our business? Should we be really worrying about it yet? A little bit more cautious. What we did see that they also learned is that half of them think, yes, this agentic stuff is going to really increase our software costs. Now, with Gen AI, only about 20% of the people thought that at the early stages. Boy, did we all learn a lesson there. But this one, there's definitely more focus and understanding that these new technologies are going to make the ideas of observability and management of that agent fleet a much bigger issue that we have to address and deal with. Now, why is this all important as well? Is with Gen AI, everybody thought that employees were a big part of the story. They wanted to use it, whatever. With agents, we're hearing early messages, many business leaders, IT employees across the board think, wow, this is threatening my job. So being very prescriptive and descriptive about why agents are valuable to the company and why they're valuable to employees is going to be important to ask. I'm going to close with one last thing here. Let's just put this in one context. There's lots about agents there, but from our perspective, probably the group that is most going to be affected by agents are the developers and data scientists that you're all supporting. Because when you think about what an agent is, what you're saying is I'm taking a product, a digital service and a product, and I'm essentially automating many of the things that a product management, product development, SRE team is doing to keep that digital product up and running and getting better all the time. I'm doing all those things like taking actions and insights, and more agentic AI is about I'm using Gen AI technologies and large language models to automate many parts of that process. And so this is why the thing to pay attention to isn't right now for most of the kinds of AI agents, but it's the introduction of agentic workflows into the application development process. That's what's probably going to be the most significant thing that you're going to want to pay attention to in the next couple of years, tracking that and understanding where to use it. So let me close by telling you, right, we started on an AI journey, but now we're clearly finishing on an agentic AI journey. Now, your goal to succeed, what will help you be the leaders in making this happen? First of all, focus, helping your company navigate the agentization of every application that you currently use and support, how to understand the timing, the values, the impacts on data. Also helping develop the orchestration and the consistency system so that I'm not just developing new agents, but I'm managing a growing fleet of agents that are out there around the world affecting my business. And last, recklessly understanding our job has always been and will always be to help companies scale. They have the confidence that the underlying infrastructure that they're using, whether it's in a corporate data center, whether it's in the cloud, increasingly whether it's in an edge location, is well managed, consistent, and you have the ability to understand how effectively it's being run from a cost, availability, and security perspective. So with that, I hope you all have a great rest of the show and hear more about how SUSE is going to make your AI life more effective. Thank you.